You're listening to A Little Too Quiet, the Ferndale Library podcast brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. My name is Jeff Milo, the host and producer of this podcast, and thank you for joining us. Rochelle Riley, award-winning journalist who was a nationally syndicated columnist for the Detroit Free Press for nearly a quarter century, advocating for improved race relations, literacy, education, community building, and children through her writing on those pages. But before her esteemed career here in Detroit, she was in Louisville for much of the 90s as an associate editor and columnist for the Louisville Courier-Journal. But she has also appeared on NPR, MSNBC, and CNN, and in the fall of 2018, she published The Burden: African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery. That was her most recent book, but now she has a brand new book, which came out this week, actually. Today, Rochelle Riley is joining us to talk about this new book titled That They Lived, and it came out this week via Wayne State University Press, and it is an eye-opening history book for all ages, as it focuses on the formative moments of the lives of icons of Black history like Muhammad Ali, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, but also Barbara Jordan, the first African-American woman elected to the House of Representatives, as well as Bessie Coleman, the most famous African-American aviator in history, and then also Stevie Wonder, of course, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., and the chapters focus on the formative moments of their youth, whether that be between the age of 12 or 22. She finds those moments in their lives, those fateful circumstances that set them on the path to becoming or achieving the things that they remain revered for the ages. But zeroing in on those moments of their youth not only makes this so relatable to young readers, but reminds adult readers that all of us were once children. And to augment the visceral poignancy of that, Rochelle Riley collaborated with photographer Cristi Smith-Jones. And with her daughter Lola and Rochelle Riley's grandson Caleb, Cristi Smith-Jones was able to recreate some of the most iconic and often breathtaking images from our history books of the famous folks detailed in these pages, and allow Lola and Caleb to stand in as models in full costume. So when you see these photos side by side with the original images from history, it is definitely impactful and just makes this such a magnificent book overall, truly for all ages. Rochelle Riley is here on the podcast to talk about That They Lived. I just think that opening this book and reading through it, it's intended for maybe audiences younger than myself, but I thought that it was such a breath of fresh air to approach the history and sort of bring these famous icons, but to sort of zero in on these sort of microcosm moments in their time, specifically when they were children. But can you tell me about the inspiration behind That They Lived?
I am thrilled to do that, but I should first tell you that it is meant for all audiences of all ages. I am hopeful for two things. One is that we teach children of all colors and backgrounds that they can be whatever they want, because every famous, every important person was once a child. But I also want to remind parents that when they're not teaching their children about these folks, they are helping to sort of perpetuate this myth that this excellence did not exist, this achievement did not exist among African Americans. So I can tell you the inspiration story is literally one of the best moments of my life. About 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, it was Black History Month of 2017. Mm-hmm. And I was trolling on, no, I shouldn't use trolling when I'm talking about social media. I was strolling on Twitter and saw these amazing photographs of this little girl dressed and totally made up as these iconic African-American women. Mm-hmm. And they were posted every day. And I found myself looking for them and waiting for them and then following this young mom who was doing it. So at the end of the month, I said, that was pretty amazing. And then I just went on with life. Well, when she did it again in 2018, I was in the middle of doing promotions for my previous book, The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery. And she was doing it again. And I went, oh my God, here she is again. And these are amazing. And I went on Facebook and found her and called her. And I said, I love that you're doing this. And she talked to me about why she was doing it and what she was teaching her daughter, Lola, who when she started was 4 and at that point was 5. And I said, it's wonderful that you're showing people these faces. They need to know these women, but I would love for them to know their stories. I'd like to talk to you about maybe writing their stories to go with the pictures. And she said, oh my God, I don't know. And I said, no, really, it would be great. And so I got on a plane and I flew to Seattle and got in a car and drove to Kent, Washington, and sat down with her and her mom and her kids and talked to her about this. And I convinced her that this would be something that I think would be beneficial. And she absolutely agreed because it was the reason that she did it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we mentioned by name, but this is, of course,
Cristi Smith-Jones.
Cristi Smith-Jones.
And that one in the center is one of the first ones that, let me turn this the right way, the first ones that she did, and that's little Lola dressed as Rosa Parks in an iconic photo, so everybody knows that one. Most people know this one, this one, because this is Thurgood Marshall. And a lot of people, because of the robe, got that. Almost every Black person I know, and many white people know that this is W.E.B. Du Bois. So the pictures are varied, and some of them immediately. When you see, for instance, Lola as Aretha Franklin in the book, you know immediately who that is. When you see her as Fannie Lou Hamer, you know immediately who that is. But some of them you may not know, even though they're famous. And I wasn't looking for hidden figures. I was looking to celebrate the ones that everybody knows, and every Black History Month, you do reports on, but I wanted them to be more than posters. I wanted people to know what life was like for them when they were 9 or 10 or 11 years old.
There was sort of a kind of a campaign of yours that you wanted to sort of on a mission almost. You write very beautifully in the opening of this, in sort of the preface, about how these figures shouldn't remain hidden, or rather, let's stop focusing on hidden figures and let's keep them from being hidden. Can you talk about that? That's sort of One America, One History, I think it was.
About 10 years ago, I was bold enough to announce that I'm going to start this work called One America, One History, and change the textbooks and change the curriculum and change everybody's syllabuses so that we will learn the complete history of America, which I think will help with race relations, because again, there's this myth that African Americans are formerly enslaved folks who, can only do so much. And what is really true is that African Americans who were formerly enslaved, despite it being illegal to teach them to read, despite their not having any capital or any help, still managed to achieve and become equal in this society. And yet there's still this ability to fight that. And part of that is the way we teach. Part of that is the textbooks that don't deal with slavery, that don't tell you about most of these folks. And that's why Carter G. Woodson created Negro History Week, which became Black History Month. But I feel like Black History Month gives short shrift to how we ought to be studying all of American history, the things that African Americans have done all year.
I wanted to talk about just little moments in the book that I found so powerful, and then I'd love to hear some of the things that you found powerful in terms of bringing them to life. But even just on page 1, when we meet young Muhammad Ali, and he's 12 years old. And it's for me, I just found that to be such a visceral image, because when we think, or when most of us think of Muhammad Ali, we see the famous images, the Sonny Liston fight and all of that. But just to imagine him as a 12-year-old looking for his stolen bike, 10 years from now, he's going to be world famous. But that moment, I loved zeroing in on that moment. And you do that with so many icons in this book. And I just can't bring into words how I found that to be kind of invigorating. But can you talk about that and what that was like as a writer?
Well, as a journalist for a long time and someone who loved reporting, even when I became a columnist, I still believed in reported columns. I knew because I used to live and work in Louisville and covered him for a while and got to spend time with him as we raised money for the Muhammad Ali Center that is there now. The story of how he got into boxing is like just folklore there, where he went to this showcase with his friend and they left their bikes outside, and his was a brand new bike, which is a big deal, for his parents to get him a bike. And he came out and it was stolen, and he said he was going to whoop the person who took it. And they said, you need to go down to that gym in the basement and look for this officer who will tell you, what he does with this boxing that he's doing with these kids. And, here's this skinny kid who's mad as hell. And he goes down and there's this officer who's running a boxing gym. And he said, well, if you're going to beat somebody up, you better learn how to do it. And that became his singular focus from that moment forward. When you talk about somebody deciding what their life is going to be, that's what he did. Training before and after school, the stories that, everybody in Louisville knows of him running around the park, near his house in these steel-toed heavy boots, and just the work that he put into becoming someone great, and then going to the Olympics and winning the gold in 1960, and then him standing there proclaiming, "I shook up the world," when he beat Sonny Liston to become one of the youngest heavyweight champions ever, not the youngest, I think. All of that came from that moment when he was 12 years old. Mm-hmm. So I tried to find those moments for each of these folks. Mm-hmm. And they range from, literally Bessie Coleman deciding that she wanted to be an aviator because they were told, women don't fly. And she said, well, these French women do. So she went to France and she came back to America and became an aviation, an aerialist, aviation pilot who did aerial tricks to raise money. Mm-hmm. And that was how she died. But she died doing what she loved because she refused to let somebody decide that, these are the jobs you can have as a Black woman in America. Mm-hmm. There were so many of those. I think for me, one of the best is Stevie Wonder. When you think about all of the, there are judges and there are iconic civil rights figures like Rosa Parks. There are all these folks, but the thing that got to me was Stevie Wonder, because everybody knows his career started when he was young. Mm-hmm. But to be an 11-year-old and blind, and your mom knowing that you're not just special in her eyes, but you have something really special, and taking you to Berry Gordy and saying, "Here, take my son." I couldn't even imagine, you can't see all of these people who are walking around. You can't, but you can hear everything. Mm-hmm. You can hear the music. You can hear the beat from Studio A. You can hear Berry Gordy's voice saying, "Oh, I think we've got something here." Mm-hmm. To have that be the beginning of an iconic life as a composer mm-hmm. and singer. Mm-hmm. So those were the moments I was looking for.
And I love this because, and again, I'm sort of harping on what we usually anticipate when we think of nonfiction history books. They do zero in on those cinematic moments. They do zero in on Muhammad Ali in the ring, or Rosa Parks with the famous sort of mugshot. And those are humongous moments in their lives. But what I really loved about this is that for whether it is a 12-year-old who's reading it, you're making it so much relatable by showing them that these folks were children once. And again, family, parents, even myself can read this because we were all children once. Yeah. Was that a big part of the inspiration?
That was the inspiration. Yeah. I thank Cristi all the time, and she won't do any press. She's done. She gave me some great photos. She's like, I said, well, maybe you can just do some Zoom calls. She said, no, not interested. So on her behalf, because this started with her photographs, I want to say that what she decided to do to teach her daughter about these women, that she would have Lola embody them, to make sure she knew that they were once young. That was what I wanted people to remember. I know when I wanted to be a writer, I was 8 years old. That's not the type of thing that people talk about or that you mention.
Right.
But now I think about that, because suppose I'd wanted to do something else, or suppose, on my way to being a writer, I decided that I'd met some nurse and decided to be a nurse. Mm-hmm. My whole life would be different. Yeah. So it's great to look back and see how quickly something can change. Like Barbara Jordan, one of the most amazing orators and civil rights leaders, and the first Southern African-American woman to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. Every kid should know that. Mm-hmm. And being a first means you don't have to ever have another first. Mm-hmm. There will never be a first Black woman in the House because she did it. Mm-hmm. And the sooner we get to the point where there are no first, the better off America and America's race relations will be. But she was a student at Phyllis Wheatley High School, and she was going to be a music teacher. Mm-hmm. It was already planned. But she heard this Black female attorney give this powerful speech, and she decided to be an attorney and a civil rights leader. If she had not heard that woman, she'd be someplace teaching piano, but instead that changed her life when she was 15 years old. So that's the kind of thing I want people to pay attention to. There will be something that happens to you in these formative years, and everybody has different views on when your formative years are. Mm-hmm. I think they are whenever they are for you. Mm-hmm. Whenever you're deciding what you want to do. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was when I was 8. For somebody else, it might be when they're 16. Mm-hmm. For Muhammad Ali, who was Cassius Clay, it was when he was 12. But when you see how that happens, and then you pay attention to what's happening in your life, you may find your path and your future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was the word I was going to use, Rochelle, is formative. Formative moments. And I love that about that. I do want to get to that in a second, but I just wanted to jump back a little bit with just to talk a little bit more about the collaboration with Cristi as a writer-reporter, kind of working directly with a photographer. Was that sort of a new change of pace for you? Was that a distinguishing feature based on other projects you worked on? Or can you just talk about other things you enjoyed about it?
As a project, it was very, very new. Mm-hmm. As a journalist, no, I would work with photographers who I'd go out on stories with, and they would, bring the great pictures that in some cases I couldn't write 1,000 words to beat, but that collaboration is very quick and it's daily and it's, you move on to the next thing. For this, we knew we were capturing something that was going to be lasting, that would be in something that would be there forever. Mm-hmm. So she took it as seriously as I did. And we had some of the pictures because we had the ones that Lola had already done. Mm-hmm. So the reason we went out there was I said, well, I want to do these. And she said, and I said, and we can do lots of books. We can do one with sports stars and we can do one with scientists. And she said, oh, no, I'm not doing another one. This will be it. And I went, oh, well, we have all these pictures of Lola, but we can't leave little boys out. So maybe we'll do some with boys. Would you just, because she was done taking pictures. And she said, would you do some of boys? And she said, well, we'd have to find a boy. And I said, I've got a boy. I flew to Dallas and I got my grandson. Mm-hmm. And we flew back to Seattle and spent a weekend, 4 days, doing a photo shoot. And it was really great because we'd do a half an hour photo shoot, then he could play Fortnite for a half an hour.
I have to say, your grandson seems like a natural photography model when you look at the image in the book, doing his tie like Muhammad Ali, or any other image. There's like a power in his eyes. I don't know. I just found it very compelling. So, well,
I think he's the most gorgeous boy in America. But I can tell you that both he and Lola, there was something about the way they did this, and some of it was instruction, and some of it was he really likes Fortnite. So he said, we can finish this really quickly if you look at this picture and you do what he's like Duke Ellington, sitting at the piano. And he sat down and he's looking, and I said, I bet you want that skin to go with it. I don't know, with the skins and the weapons and all this. I bet you want that skin to go in that next round. And he went, okay, yes, let's get this done. But the one that was really great for me was when he did Martin Luther King. Mm-hmm. We showed him the picture and said, we want to take a picture of you leaning on the podium like this man. Mm-hmm. And there was just something about that moment. He just did it. Mm-hmm. And I know that, they studied King in elementary school. And then I didn't give him lectures about these folks. We just really wanted him to focus on what that was. Mm-hmm. But for King, he knew he was someone who died for civil rights. Mm-hmm. And so he stood there and he looked off into the distance, and it was like, Cristi said, we have it.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. So there were really nice moments while we were doing this too.
Yeah. Where the gravity, we have to imagine that children can imagine the gravity of what they're doing. Obviously he would want to go play Fortnite, but in the moment of it, you can see it in his eyes, whether it's Frederick Douglass or anything. It seems like he did tune into that important historical frequency. Yeah. Which is just another compliment to this book. I think it's such a great book to be putting out right now.
Thank you.
Going back to formative moments, I just wanted to ask about, especially in journalism, I think that when we think of columnists, I think we can think too often that they are just about sort of provocative opinions or picking political fights. But when I was much younger, you came on my radar as a columnist here in Detroit because I was a high schooler getting into reading the newspaper, and here was a columnist who was actually talking about public schools and education. Can you talk about that as a priority for you? Because that has always stood out to me about you and your work.
Well, I can tell you that begins when I became a columnist. I was actually on the ladder to become I was a news executive on the way to becoming a publisher. And because there aren't many Black female publishers and aren't many Black female editors of newspapers, was riding on this for a lot of people except me. I had adopted a little girl. She was 2 years old, and I was spending a lot of time at work and a lot of time out of town. And so one day I called in I called in every day, but one day I called and I had to call early. So I didn't call it bedtime to sing or Moon River like I usually do. I had to call it dinner time because we had night meetings. So I'm in Virginia calling home to, talk to her, and her nanny answered the phone. And I said, I have to talk to her early tonight because we've got these meetings that go from 7 to 11. So I won't be able to put her to bed. And she said, well, let me tell you something first. Something happened. And went, oh God, what happened? Do I need to come home? She's, oh, no, not anything like that. I just wanted you to know that I made her a burger and fries for dinner. And her eyes got real big. And she said, I didn't know you could get this at home. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm coming home anyway. And I came back and I quit. And I said, you know what? My nanny is raising my daughter. My daughter didn't know you can get a hamburger in your own house, and I need to change my life. He said, well, you can't quit, and I don't want you to stop being an editor. So why don't we make up a job for you? And I said, well, okay, give it a shot. He said, what would you like to do? And I tell people this story all the time. I will never be able to tell you why I said this, but I said, I'd like to be a columnist. He said, okay, let's give it a shot. And I literally, my first column called the entire city of Louisville to task for not having something to honor Muhammad Ali, the most famous man in the world, the most famous man to come from Louisville, who had never had the recognition at home that he deserved because he was the Louisville Lip from a southern city and they didn't really like him. That column embarrassed people so much that the next day the mayor called from the Democratic National Convention. He said, I read the column, you're right, we have to do something. So then I got a front page story out of it.
Wow.
Mayor says that we're behind doing something for Ali. And it wasn't just my column. People had been trying for years to do something. His wife, the amazing Lani Ali, had been trying to get a museum in his honor. Well, between the reinvigoration that column helped do, we raised $80 million to build a Muhammad Ali Center.
Wow.
And so if that's your first column, it's like, okay, where do you go from there? But that was how I got to be a columnist. And once I did that, I realized that you can write a column that changes things, that make people act. And that's what not with every column, but I don't believe in navel length columns. And I might have written one or two, but those are the ones that I call, okay, I have to write a column. It's due at 5 o'clock. I don't know what I'm going to write. So I'm going to write about what I had for breakfast. That's a waste of space. So I would try to write something every time that would make people think about something that needed to be improved or changed or thought about.
Truly, which also sort of ties into the spirit of this book. And maybe you can talk about this. I'd love to know some of the formative experiences in your life, because when we think of journalists, we might think of the beat reporters who are, covering a crime scene or the courts or the city council meetings, and it's the 5 W's that they put in the morning. But the columnist, especially you, had the opportunity to approach each article that you wrote or column that you wrote by saying, why isn't this story being told? And then opening it up. And that's what I loved about it. But could you talk about that? And then maybe any other formative experiences? If you were in this book, I'd love to hear your formative experience.
Well, I should first say that it helps that I treated my column the same way I treated stories. I was a reporter before I was a columnist, and my columns would have who, what, when, where, and why. They just wouldn't be in that order.
Yes.
And it wouldn't be at the top. But for me, when I was 8 years old and I used to write poetry, and then I decided I wanted to write stories. And then I decided I wanted to actually write about what I was seeing, writing stories about the neighbors, and, nobody would want to see me coming because, oh God, she wants to be in people's business. I like being in people's business. But for me, the formative moment was being in a small town of 10,000 people. There were 10,000 people there when I was growing up, Tarboro, North Carolina. There are 10,000 people there now. And my high school English teacher decided just all of a sudden, Jean Harris said, I'm going to teach a new class on news writing so we can learn what journalists do. And I thought, that's how I can make a living as a writer.
Wow. And
that was the moment I said, that's what I'm going to do. I probably still have that green textbook that says news writing, beginning news writing, or whatever it is, from years ago. But it was the first time that I realized this is a way that I can help myself, take care of myself, raise money for myself, make a living doing something I love to do. I encourage everybody to do that. I've done that with college students, with high school students, with adults who don't know better. Do not spend 40 years doing something that you hate. Find what you love to do and find a way to make a living doing it. And that was the eye-opening moment for me, that I can do that and be a writer. And then I became a reporter, and then I became a columnist, and now I'm a writer again.
Yeah. Also, I'd love to hear, before I let you go, I'd love to hear just a couple of things that, and folks can find this book. It's coming out in February. But there are some other things you're working on, and just a couple more questions there. But do you want to talk about this series, I think, that just sort of came onto my radar recently? I think it's called Undefeated through City of Detroit.
I am very excited about that. So let me just tell people that after spending almost 20 years as a newspaper columnist at the Free Press and doing everything I wanted to do, I'm in the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame and the North Carolina Journalism Hall of Fame, had a piece of a Pulitzer, won all these things. I said, that's enough of that. What else am I going to actually do with life? Because you only get to do so many things. and I love the arts. And I had lunch with the mayor and said, Mayor Mike Duggan of Detroit. And I said, I'm getting ready to leave the Free Press and I'm trying to decide what I want to do next. And what I really want to do is to find a building and create the Detroit Black Repertory Theater, because we're the largest city in America that doesn't have a Black Repertory Theater.
Wow.
All he heard was the word theater. He said, theater, you're interested in the arts? You like the arts? And I went on and on about how much I love the arts, going to Broadway regularly to see shows and singing show tunes on demand and being a photographer and an artist. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I need a director of arts and culture. I've wanted to do that since, the beginning of my term, and I can't get anybody to really focus on that. And I said, and that's a darn shame that we would have a city that's the Paris of the Midwest that doesn't have one. And he said, well, you should consider that. And I said, I think I would like to do that. So I figured I'd get another call from somebody to ask me questions. Well, I got a call the next day saying, welcome to the city of Detroit. And I became the director of arts and culture. And my job is to oversee the city's investment in the arts, the nurturing of our creative economy, which is as strong as any in the country. Mm-hmm. And people should know that nationally, the creative arts contributes more to the gross national product than the auto industry. I think that's true regionally too, and I plan to find out. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I'm doing now is, because of COVID, making sure people still know how great we are. So we just announced the Undefeated campaign. We will be undefeated by COVID, and it's going to be a year-long celebration of arts and culture and Detroit's contributions to American excellence. Mm-hmm. You can find out all about it beginning February 1st on the ACE page, Arts, Culture, and Entrepreneurship, which is my department. That's Detroit, mi.gov/ACE, or just go to DetroitArtsAndCulture.com.
Yeah.
And it will tell you that we're going to have monthly showcases of everything. And next week, we're going to have the Black History Month kickoff everything, starting with February 1st, the mayor interviewing Alice Randall, the author of Black Bottom Saint.
I just finished that book. It's incredible.
Isn't that awesome?
It's incredible. Yeah. And then I guess one last question just for fun is, after completing this book, That They Lived, have you entertained the thought or consideration in your head of a future where you do another project that is very history-centric? You seemed like taking on a historical narrative as a writer was a great fit for you.
Well, I am doing two things right now because of the times that we're living in. The Burden, my first book, has become even more popular and is selling almost as many copies as That They Lived. Mm-hmm. And if you could see my dining room table, you would see the chapters of my novel sort of just spread out around in a circle. I have a circular table. In this circle is each chapter. It's not so much an historical novel as part memoir, part novel, because it's set in 1975. But it's my life's work. It's if I only do one book, this is my Harper Lee moment. This is my To Kill a Mockingbird. Mm-hmm. I've been working on it since 2008.
Oh boy. Which is just another good thing to sign off is patience and fortitude is important. Books take a long time. The craft of writing takes a long time. So, Rochelle Riley, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. It has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. This was awesome, and I appreciate being invited. And you can find out anything about my books at RochelleRiley.com.
We will have a link to that in the show notes and more information about this book. Thanks again, Rochelle.
Thank you.
And that was Rochelle Riley, who, towards the end of our chat, spoke about her new role as the Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit. We'll have links in the show notes that will lead you to more information about, of course, this book, That They Lived, as well as more information on the Undefeated campaign that she mentioned through the City of Detroit. Rochelle Riley, it was a privilege to get to chat with her, an award-winning columnist and author, and now working with the arts for the city. We appreciate her being here, and we appreciate you listening to A Little Too Quiet. It is the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's made possible by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. You could rate, review, or subscribe to the show, or just tell a friend, or you can visit ferndalefriends.org for more information on how to support. My name is Jeff Milo, and I thank you for listening.